My great-great-great-great-grandfather, John Sutton, was a white farmer in Jacksonville, Florida. According to his 1846 will, my great-great-great-great-grandmother was one of the people he owned. The will described her as his property, his mulatto slave Lucy, aged about 45. The will went on to set Lucy free along with her 8 children and 6 grandchildren, all listed by name and age, thus emancipating my family from slavery nearly 2 decades before the end of the Civil War. Well, uncovering the story of the will and Lucy's role in getting that will made and enforced taught me a lesson about the connections between humans, even across time, that we all have a role to play in shaping history. Now, I learned about the will because a relative whose name I don't know had done some research back in the 1980s and had traveled to the courts in southern Illinois and had found somehow a copy of this document in the files and had typed up in a cursive font the names and ages of the 15 enslaved people that John Sutton had set free, who made their way from Jacksonville to Illinois in 1846. Now, when I first seen that set of materials, it was in a set of family reunion materials back in 2001. And when I first saw it, I wanted to track down the original of that document. But it wasn't until 13 years later, when my family matriarch, my great-aunt Viola, was turning 100, that I became obsessed with tracking it down. Now, by profession, I had been a trust and estates litigator, handling court fights involving wills and trusts for some 25 years when I called lawyers in Jacksonville looking for help in finding the will. The first lawyer that I heard back from told me about the Great Fire of Jacksonville of 1901 that destroyed nearly everything, likely including John Sutton's file. But then I spoke to a paralegal named Anne, and Anne listened and became engaged as I told her about my great-aunt Viola, about her life of walking 4.5 miles each way to get her degree from Southern Illinois University, about how she married a Tuskegee Airman and traveled with him to his training where she taught other children of Tuskegee Airmen, about how she always remembered everybody's birthdays and always was kind. And Anne became engaged, and she said, "Let me see what I can do." Well, pretty soon, she told me that she had found a John Sutton file. She couldn't be sure if it was the right one, but she thought she would have it soon. And by later that week, as I was about to travel back to the Midwest to celebrate my great-aunt Viola's 100th birthday, I got Anne's excited message. "We found it. It's the right John Sutton." I told her to take a picture, and through the internet, across the country, and over 170 years of time came an image of this 2-page document in careful script on sepia paper, the red wax seal still vibrant after all these years. Now, Jeffrey, my then future husband, practiced Nichiren Buddhism with the SGI lay organization, and what that meant was he chanted twice a day, morning and evening, a chant, a vow, to achieve a world that we have never seen, a world of peace and happiness for all living beings. Well, after seeing the images of that will, I somehow felt compelled to join him one day in chanting his evening gongyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and during that prayer for the enlightenment from the ancestors, I felt the presence of John and Lucy telling me there was more to this story, and it was my destiny to reveal it. I began outlining a novel, and to create conflict and to write what I knew, I included a will contest, someone who would challenge John's will, and I invented a brother for John, and I called him Eustace, because that seemed like a good old-timey name. Well, 6 months later, when there was a trust lawyers conference scheduled for Southern Florida, the ancestors compelled me forward, and I insisted to Jeffrey that we go and see the will ourselves with our own eyes. For the 5.5-hour drive from Southern Florida to Jacksonville in the north, We counted the numbers of lynchings documented in each of the Florida counties we drove through, pledging to make a donation for each lynching to the Equal Justice Initiative, the civil rights social justice organization whose new Peace and Justice Memorial honored the inherent dignity of some 4,000 lives lost to racial terror and recognized the ripples of trauma left in their wake. In the end, we arrived in Duval County, having traveled back in time 170 years while marking 125 lynchings along the way. At the courthouse door, we drew suspicion to citified gay guys, one black, one not, both in our jaunty fedoras. In Duval, one of two Florida counties that refused to issue any marriage licenses at all rather than to issue them to same-sex couples. Our presence there as out queer people in the 3 months before a very different Supreme Court made marriage equality the law of the land for so long as it may last, that act was an act of defiance. In the bowels of the probate records department, I was handed a small Redwell file about the size of a lady's clutch purse. Hands trembling, I undid the elastic band around the file. I could almost smell the smoke and ash of the great fire that the file had somehow survived to make it to my hands. I took the 4 or so pages out of the file, and I immediately recognized that red wax seal. Breathless, I took in my hands the original will, and I placed my finger on the mark that my great-great-great-grandfather had made that set my family free. And the emotions that I felt were completely overwhelmed by the lawyer brain kicking in, curious about these other 48 pages in the file. I glanced through the file and I shouted to Jeffrey, there really was a will contest, and the evil uncle's name wasn't Eustace, it was Shadrach. Shadrach Sutton had challenged the will, arguing that John had been too old, too crazy, and too drunk to set Lucy free. The file included the transcript from the trial, consisting of the handwritten notes of probate judge William F. Crabtree, presiding over the trial, and included the testimony of the drafting lawyer, William F. Crabtree, the drafting lawyer, Gregory Yale, who testified that Lucy told him that she feared falling into Shadrach's hands because he'd always threatened to beat them if he ever came to own them. Mystically, these handwritten notes conveyed Lucy's words, these handwritten notes lost in time and disregarded for 170 years, Lucy's words conveying her fear for and her love of her family across the ages, though the words were literally stricken from the official transcript. At the bottom of the file also referenced the fact that John had been too sick to travel the 2 days into town to meet with the lawyer. So when the lawyer, Gregory Yale, showed up at the house, he met with John's sons. Yes, John called them his sons and not his slaves, who explained that they had all moved from Georgia to Florida, 100 miles with 400 cows, under the wrong impression that they could be freed in Florida. But as it turns out, if they were going to be in Florida, they couldn't be free. And if they were going to be free, they couldn't be in Florida. At the bottom of the file was the probate decree entered by Judge Crabtree on March 10th, 1847, overruling Shadrach's contest, upholding the will, and ordering Shadrach to pay $26.06 in court costs. Born into slavery, Lucy envisioned a world of freedom for her children that she had never seen herself. She made John see that world too. John's will not only freed Lucy, but also their 8 kids and 6 grandkids, down to the little 14-month-old toddler Mahala, and any unborn children as well. My ancestor John's will did not identify any white family, So despite the fact that we know that there was no consent in this arrangement, we understand that John owned Lucy. Yet somehow Lucy compelled John to see her humanity in a place and a time where racism trumped humanity in every aspect of human life. John's will was an act of defiance against the network of laws and practices and a whole society of white supremacy and the notion that black people were of a class that didn't deserve to be free. From all of this emerged a lesson that my ancestors worked to create the world that they wanted for their children and their descendants, and that so many people were essential to helping make this happen. In 1846, the drafting lawyer, Judge Crabtree, Lucy's white half-brother, whom John appointed as executor of the will to escort Lucy and the family from Jacksonville to Illinois, and all the people who helped make it possible to share this lesson. Lawyers who petitioned a judge who gave me ownership of the original file. That judge, a descendant of Jacksonville's founder, who told the tale of a court clerk who loaded a bunch of files on a boat in the St. Johns River to save from the Great Fire in 1901. The paralegal Anne, who found the will. My great-aunt Viola, whose birthday inspired this story and my search. A podcast producer named Jeremy, who introduced me to the producer of this program, and you, all of you. Each person is an essential part of this lesson. Whether we know their names or not, we are connected to our ancestors. We are the evolution of all humanity that has preceded us, and we are connected both to our direct descendants and all other descendants in the same way. Our actions are drops that ripple out through space and time. We stand in a place between the past and the future, between everything that's happened and all that can be in the here and now. So whether we take action against inhumanity and injustice or not, we are making a choice about what the world will become. Native American activist Winona LaDuke says, "Be the ancestor your descendants can be proud of." I used to think of history as what happens to famous people, to kings and queens and princes and popes, or to ordinary people who did something extraordinary, like Harriet Tubman or Rosa Parks or Bayard Rustin. But unpacking my ancestors' story has taught me that we all live in the midst of history every day. It shapes us and it changes us all the time. But we have the ability to shape and change history too, in the ways that we live our lives and in the stories that we share about them. But you say, the problems we face are so daunting. Climate change, global pandemic, racial violence and unrest, gun violence, a court that is stripping away our rights decision by decisions. I'm just one person, and I have only control over myself. But that is just the point. Recent history reminds us that one person's cough on one continent can impact people around the globe, and that one brave young woman capturing on video the shocking murder of a man by a police officer could ignite a spark in millions around the globe who'd never before understood that humanity demands that we all recognize that black lives do matter. Civil rights pioneer and mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Benjamin Mays said, "Each person is born into this world to do something unique and something distinctive, and if they don't do it, it will never be done." Buddhist mentor Daisaku Ikeda says, "When we change, the world changes." Just as I stand on the arc of history with my ancestors on one end, Lucy, who got John to make his mark on that document to make life better for their children and those who came after, including me. At the other end of that arc are descendants yet unborn, looking back, holding us to account for our actions in this moment for the future. My mission is to bend the arc of history towards justice by telling this story as widely as I can. We have to be like my ancestor Lucy, imagining a world that we have never seen and then taking action to create it for ourselves and for those who come after us. Listen to your ancestors. They speak through your instincts. This work is the work of individual humans working together. But as Maya Angelou said, nothing will work unless you do. Vote. Take action. Take it to the streets. Put your body where your heart is. If you don't have a mission of your own, join me, share this story, and make it your mission to bend the arc of history towards justice. Thank you.